Hello again, my fiber friends. I'm ReRe, and this is Exploration Crochet, part of the Yarn Over Hook network. This week's episode is about George Washington Carver, crocheter. If you're picturing George Washington Carver, you're probably seeing peanuts, sweet potatoes, crop rotation, maybe a little man in a lab coat on the campus of Tuskegee University, as it is currently known. But there is another image. Professor Carver with yarn in hands, crocheting. Today, we're telling the story of that man and how crochet and fiber artistry fit into the life of one of the most famous American scientists of the early 20th century. People are multifaceted, and history doesn't always hide the truth. Sometimes it just files it under miscellaneous non-important. But Professor Carver, the artist, is what we're going to look at. We'll start where he started, with a childhood shaped by upheaval, a love of the natural world, and hunger for learning. Because if you want to understand why a world-famous scientist would sit down and crochet, you have to understand that he was never just a scientist. When we talk about George Washington Carver's childhood, a few core facts rise to the surface. Carver was born into slavery in the Civil War era near Diamond, Missouri, sometime in the 1860s. As an infant, he, along with his mother and sister, were kidnapped by night raiders from Arkansas and later sold in Kentucky. George was recovered, but the others were not. By all accounts, he was a small and sickly child. Slavery was abolished in Missouri in January of 1865. This took place 3 weeks before the U.S. Congress proposed the 13th Amendment. And George was raised, along with his older brother James, on the farm of the people who had owned him, Moses and Susan Carver. Susan Carver taught him to read and write, and she also taught him what were considered domestic arts: spinning, weaving, sewing, knitting, and crochet. He also systematically collected and cultivated plants. So from a very early age, he had curiosity and a garden. On the Henry Ford website page titled, "What if an artist becomes a scientist?" Carver is quoted as saying, "Day after day I spent in the woods alone in order to collect my floral beauties and put them in my little garden I had hidden in the brush not far from the house, as it was considered foolish in that neighborhood to waste time with flowers." As a teenager, he was known as the plant doctor, coaxing life out of struggling plants. The National Park Service Historical Research Study emphasizes how those Carver farm years and his long, difficult quest for schooling were fundamental to the person he became. And when I say quest, I mean quest. Carver's education wasn't a straight line, it was an odyssey. He traveled, he worked, he searched, and he kept moving. And you know I love a good historical footnote. Because of his status as a child, he was known as Carver's George. When his search for schooling took him to Neosho, Missouri, known as the Flower Box City, it was suggested he go by George Carver. The W was added later while he was living in Minneapolis, Kansas, because of confusion with another George Carver and problems receiving mail. And while folks decided that the W must stand for Washington, he referred to himself simply as George W. Carver. Eventually, this roaming plant doctor makes his way to Simpson College in Iowa, where he studied art and piano. And this matters for our crochet story, because Carver didn't start as the peanut man or even a scientist. He started as an artist, trained to see detail, color, form, and design. At Simpson, his art teacher recognized his deep talent for painting flowers and plants and encouraged him toward botany. That nudge was pivotal. It carried him from art into science without ever forcing him to abandon nature or its beauty. From there, he transferred to Iowa State University, then Iowa State Agricultural College, becoming the first African American student there and later the first African American faculty member. His work at the experiment station in plant pathology and mycology, mycology being the branch of biology that focuses on fungi, including mushrooms, yeast, molds, first gained him national recognition and respect as a botanist. He earned his master's degree in 1896. So, before he's famous, before the speeches, the bulletins, and the mythic invented 300 uses for peanuts, Carver is already a walking blend of disciplines: deep observation and appreciation of nature, artist training, and a practical ethic. So hold on to that because it's also key to his fiber artistry. And the rest you know. In 1896, Booker T. Washington, the first principal and president of the Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University, invited Carver to head its agricultural department. And, another interesting side note, while Washington praised Carver's ability in teaching and original research, he considered him seriously wanting when it came to administration and practical farm managing. Ouch. It's basically the academic equivalent of, you're brilliant, but we're not putting you in charge of the clipboard. Yet and still, Carver became internationally known as an agricultural scientist and humanitarian, with a public image tied to soil conservation, crop rotation, and alternative crops to cotton that could both feed families and restore depleted land. In an era of high racial polarization, his fame reached beyond the Black community. He was widely recognized and praised for his achievements and talents. In 1941, Time magazine dubbed him Black Leonardo, as in Leonardo da Vinci, the classical polymath known equally for invention and art. Carver published articles in peanut industry journals, wrote a syndicated newspaper column called Professor Carver's Advice, and business leaders came seeking his help. He met with 3 American presidents, both of the Roosevelts, that's Theodore and Franklin, as well as Calvin Coolidge. The Crown Prince of Sweden studied with him for 3 weeks. From 1923 to 1933, Carver toured white Southern colleges for the Commission on Interracial Cooperation, and he formed a friendship with Henry Ford. Professor Carver was invited to speak at a conference in Dearborn, and later, when his health declined, Ford installed an elevator at the Tuskegee dormitory where he lived so the elderly man wouldn't have to climb stairs. Now, that's a life that's loud on paper. Presidents, titles, tours, famous friends, international recognition. But here's the thing. Even during his busiest years, he didn't stop being an artist. And that leads us directly to crochet. So let's start with this and be super clear. Carver's crochet isn't just a cute rumor or a fun fact floating around craft circles on the interwebs. Tuskegee University catalogs an archival photograph taken by P.H. Polk described plainly Carver crocheting. It shows crochet in hand and is framed as one of the arts and craft practices he used for relaxation and creative expression. Then, National Park Service teaching materials about Carver as an artist state outright that he found time to crochet, knit, and do needlework while performing his plant studies, that he found these activities fulfilling, and that they allowed him to produce useful items for friends. And that same documentation connects fiber work to his love for natural materials. It notes he dyed his own threads and fibers using natural dyes made from local walnut, mulberry, and sweet potato. Now, some accounts go even further into the Carver as color alchemist details. They describe him as extracting pigments from local Alabama clay, reds, oranges, and a series of deep browns, all to dye threads. even describing him as having rediscovered a formula for Egyptian blue. And then there's the maker ingenuity we love. Stories of taking burlap sacks, unraveling them, dyeing those fibers with peanut and sweet potato skins, and crocheting them into intricate lace. Whether you picture him at a lab bench or a dyeing table, the through line is the same: artist, scientist. So, documented crochet, documented needlework, documented natural dye practice. And from a craft history point of view, that's huge because it places him inside a real tradition: fiber work as skill, utility, artistry, and experiment, all at once. Now, let's widen the lens beyond the hook a little bit. A scholarly paper in the Textile Society of America Symposium Proceedings describes research that aimed to systematically catalog images and extant pieces of Carver's textile work held at George Washington Carver National Monument and at Tuskegee's historic holdings. That paper reports that holdings indicate Carver was proficient in embroidery, weaving, knitting, basketry, and crochet. And it points to examples attributed to him in the national park documentation, including embroideries on burlap, ornaments made from chicken feathers, seed and colored peanut necklaces, and woven textiles. Think crochet and knit. Because if you've ever done fiber art, you know what that list sounds like: experimenting with textures, turning scraps into design, treating the everyday thing as a palette. And that is more than a hobby list, that's a maker's worldview. If you look at the samples of Carver's work held today at Tuskegee or the National Park Service, you see precision. His crochet isn't just utilitarian, it's mathematical. He explored complex motifs, floral patterns that mirrored his botanical sketches, and more. And it's the same worldview that powered his science: work with local materials, reduce waste, learn from nature, and create practical beauty that serves real people. He sincerely believed that even the poorest person deserved beauty at home. So, why does crochet belong in the Carver story? Because crochet is a craft that is part science and part nature. And I've said it so many times: it's adaptable, it's mathematical, it's meditative, it turns thread into structure, it's usefulness and art braided into one. And for Carver, an artist trained to see form, a scientist trained to test materials, and a teacher committed to uplifting everyday life, fiber work wasn't a side quest. It was language he spoke fluently. And I love this detail. The National Park Service materials describe his art as something he never let go of, something that informed how he drew diagrams, how he collected specimens, how he approached creativity in scientific work. So, yes, he's famous for agriculture, but the thread running through his whole life is creative application. The conviction that beauty and function can live in the same object. That's crochet energy. George Washington Carver passed away in 1943. In December of 1947, a fire broke out in the Carver Museum, and much of the collection was either damaged or destroyed. Reportedly, all but 3 of the 48 paintings housed at the museum were also destroyed. If there's one takeaway from Professor Carver's life, it's a reminder that people are complex and that curiosity has no boundaries. You can be a world renowned scientist and still find peace in a crochet hook. So, the next time somebody reduces Professor Carver to the peanut guy, I want you to picture that photograph: yarn in hand, crochet in motion, because that image reminds us that history is full of amazing people whose creative lives got edited out. And of course, feel free to say, oh no, he was so much more than that. I will leave links for articles, images, and archival footage of not just his crochet samples, but his beautiful paintings in the show notes. There also exists a color film of Carver shot around 1937 by African American surgeon C. Allen Alexander that was added to the National Film Registry in 2019. The 12 minutes of silent footage show him tending flowers, displaying his paintings, and crocheting. That link will be included as well. And we're going to close with a 1942 recording of the professor himself reading a portion of the Edgar Guest poem, Equipment. And just to let you know, his voice is high pitched, which has been attributed to things he experienced as a child. Professor Carver famously said, "When you can do the common things of life in an uncommon way, you will command the attention of the world." And to me, that's crochet. So until next time, stay curious, stay crafty, and remember people are often so much more than you know. This has been Exploration Crochet. Thank you for listening.
Courage must come from the soul within. The man must furnish the will to win. So figure it out for yourself, my lad. You are born with all that the great have had. With your equipment, they all began. Get hold of yourself and say, I can.